In just a few moments, we're going to segue into a discussion that I had wanted to have after a report came out by our New York City Council Speaker, Corey Johnson, because just a few days ago, he unveiled a plan to address food inequity in New York City. And as he said in his introduction to the release of this comprehensive report, New York City is one of the richest cities in the world. So everyone should have equitable access to healthy food, and every community should have greater control over their food options, and every neighborhood should have food businesses that reflect the community's cultures and diversity. So during this half hour of the show, I'd like to learn more about Speaker Johnson's plan and what the speaker and our other city leaders hope to achieve, both short and long term, and what some of the challenges are. So joining me now is New York City Council member Rafael Espinal of Brooklyn. He has been one of the leaders advocating for a citywide plan for urban agriculture. Council member Espinal, welcome back to City Watch.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
So thanks so much for joining us. But before we get to discussing the report that was just issued, I do want to talk a little about the incidents that took place in El Paso and in Dayton, Ohio. Because, for one, I'm just sick of hearing the cliches of thoughts and prayers and calls for more gun control reforms, but then not seeing anything get done. What is the answer?
It's obvious that thoughts and prayers do not work. We have been calling, and we've been hearing members of Congress expressing, their regrets for what's happening on the ground. But we know that the only solution to the problem is if Congress was to act and pass real gun reform. There's a lot of conversation about how we also must tackle mental health issues, but they both go hand in hand in tackling with this larger problem. And let's be clear. The U.S. has a real problem in its hands. When you look at the numbers, we have about 250 mass shootings this year alone. Compare to other countries that have numbers down in the single digits, zero. The nearest country that compares to ours is Mexico, with only 3 mass shootings so far. So we have a grave problem in our hands, and I think it's time that the American people wake up. If they don't see any action from their Congress people, get on the ground, get people out to vote, and vote against them. We need real leadership to really step in and tackle this problem.
And you say we need real leadership, and I've talked during this show about the comments by Cory Booker today, basically laying blame at the doorstep of President Trump, given the climate in this country. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree that Donald Trump has a huge hand over the increase of shootings we have been seeing, especially with the rhetoric he has been pushing since 2016. But let's be clear, mass shootings have been happening for many years now, and the reality is that we have members in Congress, Republican members specifically, even during the Obama administration, were afraid to take on real gun reform that would have prevented mass shootings that we saw in the past 24 hours. So, yes, the president is right now solely responsible for the increase of shootings, but overall we have to push Congress to do the right thing.
So I want to get to the topic that I talked about a little while ago that prompted me to want to have you on the show, and it was the announcement just a few days ago by Speaker Corey Johnson about addressing food inequity. Why is it necessary at this time? And then can you talk a little about the key recommendations that came out?
Well, food inequity is a problem in New York City. We have 16% of New Yorkers who are food insecure, meaning we have families that are going to bed hungry every single night. So we have to look at ways in which the city could increase funding to great programs to help expand programs like, for example, Health Bucks, which puts real dollars in New Yorkers' hands to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. We have communities across the city, like East New York, in the South Bronx, that have struggled with access to groceries that can provide healthier food options. We have to look at how we can leverage the city's Fresh program, which actually incentivizes supermarkets and the development of supermarkets in communities through tax breaks. How can we expand that to help, for example, smaller grocers? And then when we look at the nonprofits on the ground, like, for example, our food pantries, who are really doing the work in getting food to the hands of hungry New Yorkers, we have to make sure that they have the resources capable to deal with the demand. Just a few days ago, I was taking a walk in my own district, and I passed by a food pantry, and the line was literally around the block. And it was just a clear indication that there are more and more families day by day that need this assistance. And I think we can attribute it to the rising cost of being a New Yorker. You know, every time the rent goes up, it puts less money in the pockets of New Yorkers to be able to have access to food.
And I noted also in the report that one of the elements is promoting summer meals programs. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, summer meals programs is a great program that, for example, our the DOE currently pushes, where students and families are able to go into certain schools and be able to access lunch meals. I remember as a child, my grandma used to take me to those free meals, and it's a way to take the burden off families that are struggling, or families that are food insecure. Important that we look at pockets in the city that could greatly benefit from those programs. And just talking on a bigger issue, there's a lot of food that just goes wasted, and we have to look at how do we reduce that waste and understand that more food is actually going into the trash than are getting into the hands of New Yorkers that are in need.
And, when we talk about summer meals programs, we're talking about younger kids, but also the report addresses college student hunger. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great proposal. It was actually something that was eye-opening to me, and I didn't really understand that it was a real issue. But when the speaker, Corey Johnson, brought it up in this conversation about expanding funding into CUNY to make sure that college students have access to food, I thought it was a home run. It's really an issue that I've been hearing over the past few days from college students themselves that they're facing. One, because they're living on a small budgeted income. They might come from a home who that also is food insecure in general. And when they're spending their money in buying books and other materials they need to study and get through college, the food becomes like the last item that they're looking to purchase. And I think we all know as New Yorkers and just human beings that we cannot function throughout our day if we don't have access to a good meal. It's hard to concentrate, it's hard to do your work, it's hard to do your homework. So providing students with these meals will have an overall positive impact on our society as a whole.
So currently I'm reading Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and she talks a little about the seeds of the ideas that she had to present a national plan to address a lot of these issues. But she acknowledged early on what some of the potential challenges could be, the resistance. Can you talk a little about what happens next and what are some of the challenges ahead to be able to execute a lot of these components?
Well, there is, I would say, a resistance on the ground from, I think, New Yorkers as a whole to wanting to eat healthier or not finding healthy food options as a viable source for their meals, and it all comes down to education. I believe that when First Lady Obama was pushing this program, a lot of they've seen a decline in student participation in school lunches. But it comes down to pairing those food programs with nutrition-based education in the classrooms. You can set up farmers markets across the entire city, but that does not mean that every New Yorker is going to want to play a part in accessing that food and purchasing from it, because they don't understand the nutritional value of eating healthier, eating locally. So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to education. And I think that. And that's something I've been pushing for in my own district, pushing programs like, for example, this great nonprofit Wellness in the Schools that actually goes into the schools, teaches the lunch staff how to cook from scratch using fresh ingredients, but also going into the classroom and giving cooking classes to the students so they can learn the nutritional benefits of fresh local food, but also learn how to make that at home to encourage their own parents to purchase healthy food when they go shopping.
So, Councilmember, we've got just about a minute or two left. I want to just go to two other quick issues. One is the judge's decision late last week on Daniel Pantaleo. How would you say the mayor has handled this, and what should the police commissioner do?
Well, I would say this. I believe that Pantaleo should be fired. He should have been fired from the moment that the video was released and it became clear that he played a hand at the death of Eric Gardner. The mayor, I believe, understands the intensity and the importance moving forward with firing Pantaleo. But I think it's clear that they have been passing the buck. They have been delaying a decision because of fear of political ramifications. And I think that's the responsible and right thing to do. It's so that we as a city are going to hold police officers accountable if they use aggressive force against its own citizens.
And last we had you on WBAI when my co-host Celeste Katz of Driving Forces and I had you in studio. It was before you came out with your endorsement of Bernie Sanders. So, I want to let our listeners know, because at that time you wouldn't say where your endorsement was going to go. What led you to believe Bernie Sanders is the right candidate now to succeed Donald Trump?
Yeah, for full transparency, I actually was the first elected official back in 2016 to endorse Bernie Sanders. I believe I was the first this second time around. And honestly, I at first I wasn't sure if I was going to get behind Sanders' campaign. There was a lot of candidates on the table with a lot of great ideas. But at the end of the day, after hearing everyone's ideas, while some share similarities to Sanders, I think Bernie is the only one that when he speaks actually means what he says, and he's the only one I can trust that when he gets to the White House, that he'll follow through and deliver on what he's talking about, because these are the issues he's been talking about his entire career.
And how would you rate his performance during the presidential debate this past week?
This past week, I would say he was the best one on stage. The first time around, I was a little concerned. For the second time around, he really showed up and showed that he's ready for the job, and he's going to tackle these issues with the same intensity he's had his entire career.
Councilman Espinal, how can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, Jeff, they can find me on Instagram or Twitter at RL Espinal, or shoot me an email, Rafael Espinal at rafaelespinal.nyc.
Councilman Espinal, thank you so much for joining me here on WBAI today.
Thanks, Jeff. Always a pleasure.
So when we talk about a number of these issues about food insecurity, we also have to consider the barriers to ensuring equitable access to healthy food. That's bringing me to my final guest today, a very familiar voice here on WBAI, someone who's going to promise me, according to Sean, our engineer, and myself, that he'll speak a little slowly, is Joel Berg. Joel is the CEO of Hunger Free America and was there for the announcement, if I'm correct. Joel, welcome back to WBAI.
Thank you, Jeff. Before we talk about hunger, I do want to mention something about the shootings,
yes,
the horrific events in El Paso and in Dayton. And I want to stress that Hunger Free America has no stands on gun safety, and we're a nonpartisan group. That being said, the reason we have the only massive repeated assault weapons deaths in America is because of the modern Republican Party. And my transition is to say, unfortunately, the only reason we have massive hunger in America and the only industrialized Western democracy that has such levels of hunger and food insecurity is because of the modern Republican Party. It's fashionable to want to say both sides. It's fashionable to say there are good people on both sides. But the very same politicians who are proclaiming their dedication to being pro-life are the very same politicians who want every mass murderer to be able to have assault weapons and to cut off low-income people from food.
And what was interesting, I had read right before the show that Jake Tapper this morning on State of the Union, I guess he indicated that a number of Republican legislators would not go on the show today to talk about this.
Yes, I did tweet at 3 swing state Republicans this morning in my role as a private citizen, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, Cory Gardner of Colorado, and the infamous Susan Collins of Maine, asking them to immediately demand that Mitch McConnell allow a vote on serious gun safety legislation on the floor of the Senate. I wasn't expecting a response, but I did not get one. The bottom line is we're in a fight now for the soul of our country. And if we truly value human life, we will make sure that mad men and mad women don't have assault weapons, and we'll make sure that everyone has enough food.
So in that last part, saying that you want to make sure that everyone has enough food, you were there for the announcement by Corey Johnson last week. Can you talk to me a little about this plan and what resonated most with you?
It really was a historic announcement, and I know it built on the work of one of his mentors, Christine Quinn, who did a great job on food issues when she was the Speaker of the City Council. It really is a comprehensive plan dealing with everything from access to the SNAP, the current name for the food stamp program, to school breakfast, to urban farming, to access to retail in low-income neighborhoods, to a serious commitment of funding from the city. And so from a advocate's point of view, we're never 1,000% satisfied, but this is pretty up there in the 999% category. It really was a home run for us and everything we stand for, and most importantly, for the over 1 million New York City residents who can't always afford enough food. Having arguably the second most powerful member of the New York City government so deeply committed to your cause is important, not only substantively, but I think sort of emotionally. Knowing that government and key government officials on your side is big, in addition to, even more importantly than that, knowing the money's on your side.
So you mentioned 1 million people. Give us a sense of the landscape of food insecurity in the city. Has it improved, worsened? Where does it impact people most?
Well, food insecurity, the wonkish term for hunger, is really rampant in New York, but it's not the same level of hunger as you'd see in Somalia or North Korea. It's not people starving in the streets. It is people choosing between food and medicine, people choosing between food and health care, choosing between food and paying their rent. You can't ration your rent payments or you get evicted. You can buy less food. But the level of hunger and food insecurity we have in the city is still higher than before the Great Recession. Let me repeat that. The level of food insecurity in New York is still higher than before the Great Recession. So it's gone down a little since the peak of the recession, but we're basically being told this is the new normal, that 1 million people in New York City and 40 million nationwide, which is bigger than the combined population of Florida, West Virginia, and all the New England states combined. Those are the amount of people in New York and America who can't always afford enough food. We're told to accept that as sort of some new normal. And we fundamentally at Hunger Free America and our New York City division, Hunger Free New York City, we don't accept that. We reject that. And we are going to fight harder than ever for an America and a New York City where everyone can afford enough food.
So I mentioned to the councilman that I currently am reading Michelle Obama's book, and she talks about when she envisioned addressing hunger issues and food issues, and that there would be formidable challenges and resistance in some quarters. What do you think it's going to take for the city to be able to execute many of these measures that Corey Johnson's proposing?
Well, I think it's important to understand that hunger and obesity are flip sides of the same malnutrition coin. That when people can't afford healthier food, it's not that they don't know, it's not that they're not taking enough time to cook it, they just can't afford the healthier food, and if they're working 2 or 3 jobs, they just don't have the time to do it. So it's understanding that the very same steps needed to reduce obesity are the same steps needed to reduce hunger. I love First Lady Obama. She's an inspiration to all of us. The administration did a lot of great things on food, but my quibble with her, and in my 5 seconds that I met her once, I told her this, is that they seem to imply the only real problem was obesity and didn't fully explain to the American people the connections between the two. I think Speaker Johnson's doing a great job of that and also focusing on the big levers of it. What's needed. It's amazing that the council is providing $20 million for soup kitchens and food pantries, but the SNAP program, the food stamps program in New York City, is going to spend about $2.8 or $2.9 billion. That's billion with a B in New York City. So my math's off, but I think that's something like 1,000 times what the city is spending on pantries and kitchens. And we've got to keep our eyes on the ball, including the Trump administration attacks against these programs. In addition, I think my only slight quibble with the speaker is he sort of trumpeted the success of school breakfast in New York City, and we've made progress, and it's certainly absolutely vital that the council rejected the mayor's inexplicable call to cut school breakfast by $6 million a year. I don't understand how the man's traveling across the country sounding like a Sandinista and then proposing things like Ronald Reagan, Mayor de Blasio is. So I'm glad the council rejected the school breakfast funding. But the fact of the matter is we are still the worst performing big city in the United States when it comes to school breakfast, because the DOE is basically giving a veto power to some principals who don't understand the importance of breakfast, not just as an anti-hunger tool, as an educational tool. So I do hope the council and all the other elected officials in New York, including Comptroller Stringer, really keep the pressure on DOE, not only to say, okay, we're glad you restored the money, but to really implement it. And the other thing I'd only slight quibble in is it is really, really, really important, slightly quibble, I should have proper English, even if our president doesn't. It's really, really, really important to reduce food waste. That's a critical thing to do for the environment, because food is still the largest single contributor to the solid waste stream in New York. It's a horrible tax on the environment to ship so much of our garbage to Pennsylvania. It's an entire great burden on taxpayers, so it's a bad thing. But I do not think even recovering some extra food waste will dramatically reduce hunger in New York. The only thing that will work is increasing wages, decreasing costs for things like housing and childcare, and ensuring there's an adequate safety net like the SNAP program and school meals. What was your question?
I forget, but I'm going to have to wrap up in about
me slowly.
wrap up in about 30 seconds, but please let our listeners know what else you are up to, because if they miss your voice and want to know what you're up to, I think they should know.
They can come to hungerfreeamerica.org and find out all the things they are doing and we are doing together, particularly to hold this president accountable and to oppose with every fiber of our being his attempts to take food away from millions of hungry working parents, children, senior citizens, people with disabilities, and veterans. hungerfreeamerica.org. And thank you, Jeff, for keeping attention to these vital issues.
Joel, thanks for joining us today. Sean Rhodes has been smiling the whole time because he also wanted to hear how slowly you would speak. But thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. That's my Al Gore imitation.
Have a great day. So as we come to a close, I want to thank today's guests. In addition to Joel Berg, who you just heard, Lexi Rabati, Namita Luthra, and New York City Council member Rafael Espinal. Of course, our wonderful engineer, Sean Rhodes, and you, our listeners. If you missed any part of the show, visit us at WBAI.org. Go to programs, then archives. The show will be up in about 10 minutes. You can also follow me, Jeff Simmons, on Twitter at Jack Heights. That's Hites. And CityWatch also can be found on Twitter at CityWatch WBAI and on Facebook. Thank you for joining WBAI today, and stay with us through the afternoon. Have a great day.